I'm Dan Drake. This is Front Up on Geno TV, and with us today is Linda Williams. Linda is here to talk about the anything else she wants to talk about, but particularly the articles that are on the warrant for this year's town meeting relate to the Historic District Commission. Because these articles do change, if they were to be put into effect, change the tone of the HDC and its scope of authority. So why don't we go through them one by one and talk about them. The first one is relates to term limits. And I don't know that you're a poster child for term limits. How long have you been? How many terms have you been on the HDC?
I have no idea how many terms. And thank you for my annual visit to the show. I think I've been on 15 years plus. I came on as an alternate and then ran, I think, one more time as an alternate, and then I filled in someone's seat as a regular member, and it's been downhill ever since.
So what do you think of the idea of limiting a member of the HDC to 2 terms?
I think it's foolish. The learning curve on the HDC is humongous, because not everybody who comes on the HDC has a building background or a design background or has any clue what elevation looks like on a piece of paper, or how to interpret it so it's 3D in your head. And that takes a very long time. I think the first 6 years, though, even though I had banged nails for a construction company, I'd done shingling for a construction company, and I had built and designed 2 houses of my own, it still took me quite a while to get used to looking at a set of blueprints, elevations, window changes, being able to discern an old window versus a new window, being able to understand a wall plane, a height, eave heights, things like that. Rudimentary stuff, it took me quite a while. And you want people on the HDC that have a tremendous amount of experience. It's the one board you have to get up to speed and you have to get experience. It's trial by fire. You come on with no experience, sit down, look at a set of plans, you don't have a chance to do it over again. So term limits wouldn't apply to the HDC. The longer you're on, the more adept you are at looking at a set of plans in 5 minutes and being able to discern what the problem is and helping the applicant.
Is there a happy medium?
No.
4 years or 4 terms or 6 terms or?
Not really. Yeah. I mean, you look at somebody like John McLaughlin, who's been on for, as John says, since Methuselah was born. He has a certain understanding, let's say, of designs and Nantucket history. He brings the neighborhood history, the context history, who built that building, I worked on it, or my dad worked on it, or something along those lines. So everybody brings something different to the table, but it requires quite a length of time to be comfortable with it. And the one board you want people to be comfortable with is the HDC, because it doesn't have rules and regulations like the planning board and the zoning board, which have a code, by law code. The HDC works off of neighborhood context, history, design of the building in relation to other designs in the neighborhood. It works off of a set of guidelines, not rules and regulations. So you have to be able to interpret those guidelines competently so you don't end up having something crazy happen, which is why the law was changed in 1970 anyway.
Let's come back to this question of being comfortable with the HDC, because that's obviously been an issue recently.
Yes, it has.
We'll come back to that, but let's go through the rest of these. The second one is reconstituting the authority of the HDC just to cover the historic districts in Old Nantucket and Old Sconset, essentially what it was originally set up to do.
In the 50s.
In the 50s, before it was expanded to the rest of the island in the early 60s.
That is the most insane warrant article I've seen in the 40 years I've lived here that relates to the HDC. And there's been wing doozies there with the HDC, but and people have a love-hate relationship with the HDC, but it's a necessary evil in many people's minds. But to go back to 1955 would allow something like Tristram's Landing, who we're all used to now, proliferate. What makes Nantucket special and what keeps people coming back here is the iron-fisted control we have over how it's developed and what it looks like.
Is that what gets people back, or is it consistency? I mean,
it's consistently gray is what it is.
People don't know what goes on behind the scenes to keep it that way.
It's a lot of heavy lifting.
But they like it.
They like what they see. Can we be unreasonable and arbitrary? Maybe. For sure. You're dealing with a very subjective process.
That's not really what I'm talking about.
But the issue of coming back to where it was in the 50s would just create chaos. We'd have pink houses, blue houses, green houses. It just would have no consistency. Homogeneous architecture here. When I go to New Jersey, I drive around and look, oh my God, there's a pink house. That's great. But here, that's not what we're after. We're after controlling how we look so we always remain special for generations to come. If we pushed it back, it'd be insane.
I remember being very struck by taking a cruise through some of the islands. I won't mention the town in Maine just because I don't want to get them upset, but through the islands around one of the towns and really being off-put by the lack of control, if you will, on the architecture.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that it's so mishmash and in many ways very unattractive.
Well, look at some of the places on the Cape. They're not an entire historic district. You've got Kings Highway, which is old 6A. And look at those houses and where the businesses have had to construct themselves on 6A. Spectacular. You go a half a mile north or south of 6A, and you're running into Barnstable and McDonald's and strip malls and everything else. That's what having control, the big difference. You can see it there more than here. Because obviously we have the old historic district, and we have Tom Nevers, and we have Pocomo and more newer construction. And even that is a little bit jarring compared to the historic areas. But it all has a sameness to it. When you're on somewhere else, like the Jersey Shore, I grew up in New Jersey, you go down the Jersey Shore, and it's chaos. We've all seen it with Sandy. Good pictures of what was built down there. But you can't do that here. And nobody wants that here. So I think that is crazy. Now, maybe Curtis did it to start a dialogue, but there really is no dialogue. Either it is the whole island, or it's those two areas.
Is it possible to compromise on the level of attention paid to the out of town, the non-historic district properties, and not be quite so fussy about the windows and so forth?
Absolutely. Over time, we've had members that have wanted to put the restrictions of downtown, the more anal retentive we are downtown and Wisconsin and Old Matticat, and they wanted to take that and push those restrictions out in Tom Nevers, which is a very new settlement in the last 40 years, and other places. And I don't think we should do that. I do think we need to be a little bit more lax or common sense outside of town. I don't need to make Tom Nevers look like Main Street. So I do think it's always a personal philosophy. Again, it's back to the subjective process. You just sort of have to overcome that and get to some sort of consensus. There's no way to write two different bylaws, if that's what you're saying, two different guidelines. Because that would be the only other way.
Is it possible institutionally to find a middle ground there? Or is it so subjective, as you said, that it just can't work because of the makeup? It
can't work because you're dealing with individual design as opposed to we want all Tom Nevers to look like this and all Main Street to look like this. It's hard to come up with a fast and strict or fast and loose rules and regulations for Tom Nevers versus Matticat versus Quidnet. What I think we need to do, though, is go and identify certain things that are allowed in Tom Nevers and are allowed in Matticat versus old Matticat versus the old part of Quidnet versus the new construction on Squam. We have to take note of that and not be so rigid in our thinking that we said that can never happen in Pocomo.
Right.
Really, is there going to be an impact in Pocomo as opposed to Main Street? Right. So I do think it's just a mindset and a philosophy, and I think over the last couple of years, several of us have been moving that direction, but trying to codify it is going to be very difficult. But I do think we need to have an old historic district in Quidnet, an old historic district in Old Matticat, and maybe a couple of the other old pockets, which are very small, but I think they all have their own identification. Because what I find in Wisconsin is that I've dealt with members that try to take what's normal in town on Fair Street, Pine Street, and try to make that normal in Wisconsin. And all you have to do is what I did this summer with my camera, is go up and down the bluff walk 3 times and find things that we would never allow today and certainly never allow anywhere else. And so I think we need to be a little bit more particular about where something happens. Wisconsin's totally different than town.
Right.
It's beautiful. It's
Well,
got
you
all
and I
kinds
had
of
a
weird
discussion
stuff.
several years ago about roof peaks in
Right, in Mattakit.
Right?
And I think we need to start spending a little bit of time, whether they're work groups from these areas, but finding out what is architecturally significant in those areas, and then just sort of go with it. Instead of saying, no, absolutely not, even though there's 75 examples of it within an eighth of a mile.
Right.
And that's what I find most frustrating. And that's hard to get some members to move in that direction.